Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We are in our first of our deep dive webinar series. Tonight, we'll be looking at hydrology. Our speaker tonight is Bill Kappel. He spent more than 30 years as a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. He studied surface water and groundwater interaction in the Empire State, and has firsthand experience dealing with flood situations in the Finger Lakes. He's worked with Flowpod, described the hydrology of the Oswego River Basin, and has been given over since retiring, has worked with a number of different lake associations and given presentations on hydrology and the circumstances of their lakes. He's joined us tonight for a presentation. It'll last about 30-45 minutes, give or take, and then he'll have some room for questions at the end. I ask everyone who is not Bill to mute themselves, please. And if you have any questions, you can ask in the chat, which there I have a message in there that says that you can ask the question in the cat. It's the chat. And with that out of the way, I think we should just dive right in right now. And let's get started. So just a reminder to everyone who is still joining us, please mute yourself. And if you have any questions, you can ask in the chat. And now I'm going to turn things over to Bill.
Okay, thank you, Ben. This talk has been, it said I've given it numerous different watershed groups. In fact, I think I did Seneca Lake about 10 years ago, so this will be somewhat of a repeat and updated. Basically, the ups and downs of Seneca Lake, or how I learned to stop worrying and understand the changes in Seneca Lake water levels. If it sounds familiar, it's from Dr. Strangelove. Name is Bill Kappel, hydrogeologist. I am retired. Two things to start out with. While I work for the U.S. Geological Survey, anything I present tonight is not, it's not USGS. It's Bill Kappel talking. And second, I don't have all the answers. I do have a lot of experience, but I don't have all the answers. Okay, this is the Oswego River Basin. It basically extends from Canandaigua Lake all the way up through Oneida Lake area. It's various different watersheds. On the Barge Canal, it starts the Clyde River and then becomes the Seneca River after the Seneca River starts at Seneca Lake into Cayuga Lake, and then the Seneca River extends past Syracuse and Onondaga Lake, joined by the Oneida River, and then it becomes at Three Rivers Junction, it becomes the Oswego River. The size of the watershed is about 5,200 square miles, about the size of Connecticut. So imagine trying to control all the water in the state of Connecticut. Okay, this is a rather crude diagram, but I just want to show this as far as the different general elevations within the watershed. To the south, we have the 2,000-foot Appalachian Plateau contour. And then we have the 1,000-foot contour, which at one time probably looked like this, but due to several different periods of glaciation, the Finger Lakes were basically cut by glacial action cutting into the sediments all the way here. So instead of having a smooth line, we have this sawtooth with the Finger Lakes, and all these Finger Lakes eventually drain to the north. Between these areas here, they drain to the south. This is the watershed divide between the Susquehanna River to the south and the Oswego River Basin to the north. We also have a 500-foot contour which extends around Seneca and Cayuga Lakes. These is because these are the lowest lakes, the deepest lakes, and the lakes that extend further to the south. The reason for all this is a long time ago, the bedrock was laid down flat due to plate tectonics. We now have the bedrock dipping to the south, and there was basically a low in the, pardon my computer's deciding to do some stuff for me, basically to create a ditch like in the middle where Seneca and Cayuga are. The big thing here is this 500-foot contour extends from Oneida Lake all the way over to Macedon. And so the elevation along here is very slight. And this is one of the reasons that there's so much in the way of flooding, because once you get into the system, the water doesn't move rapidly in this part of the system. This is a cartoon that I've used many, many times. This is from a report I did in the 1990s. But basically, these are obviously the Finger Lakes. But if you notice the y-axis and the x-axis between each one of these tick points, this is 10 miles. Between the tick points on the y-axis, each one is 25 feet. This gives you a picture that this area as a whole is quite shallow. So if we look at the Seneca Lake watershed, we begin at Cayuga Lake, and Cayuga Lake has 4% of the Oswego River Basin watershed area. We move down to Seneca Lake, and we basically gain 10% with the watershed around Seneca Lake plus the intervening area. And then we get down to Cayuga Lake, and that is about 29%. So we're looking at another 10% for the Cayuga Lake watershed. This right here is between the Montezuma Refuge and Baldwinsville. This area was naturally flat, and the barge canal, when they moved from an actual canal to the river system, took advantage of this. And so this is very, very flat through here. And this is like 30 miles. And this causes a lot of problems. You have the other Finger Lakes coming in further to the east. And then you have Oneida Lake coming in from the east. And then it basically, you can see that the elevation change is very rapid along the Oswego River to Lake Ontario. So this is what's called a digital elevation model. Basically, it's a computer generated topographic map. So what we have is Seneca Lake over here. Seneca Lake drains east and drains into the northern part of Cayuga Lake. It actually into the lake itself. Once it goes through Mudlock, it goes north as the Seneca River, and then it follows and flows to the east, goes into and out of, rather quickly, Cross Lake, then moves up to Baldwinsville, past Onondaga Lake, and then further to the north, and then it finds its way as the Oswego River up to Lake Ontario. Okay, I'm going to look at three different gauging sites. This is the outlet of Cayuga Lake at Dresden. The thin line here is the discharge. The darker line here, the heavier line, is the water level. So the water level, just the gauge level, is 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, where on this side is, is basically the discharge. And the discharge at this particular point is about 550 cubic feet per second. It's a measurement of water flow. A cubic foot is 7.5 gallons, but I'm not going to go into any greater detail on that. We now move to the Seneca River, downstream of Seneca Falls, where the Seneca River empties into the watershed of Cayuga Lake. Again, here we see all this noise, and all this noise is likely the operation of the power plants that exist along the Seneca River at Waterloo and Seneca Falls. And this water level here is basically the water level of Cayuga Lake, because this water is discharging directly into Cayuga Lake. So what we have is Cayuga Lake with 550 CFS, and then we have about, 2,550. So we have an additional 2,000 CFS just coming from the Seneca Lake watershed. Next, we move downstream of Mudlock, which is the control structure for Cayuga Lake. And again, here we have the thin line is the discharge, and the heavier line is the water level as measured downstream of mudlock in the Seneca River. And over here, what we have is we have the 550 CFS from Kuka, the 2,500, and then we have here about 4,500. So an additional 2,000 CFS. That's a lot of water. And then finally, we get all the way down to Baldwinsville. And here again, the thin line is the discharge. The heavier line is the water level at Baldwinsville itself. The interesting point is here, you can see that the discharge has always been quite high. The discharge here is about 8,000 cubic feet per second. So with all of these others at Baldwinsville, it's basically picking up almost another 4,000 cubic feet a second. So all this water is coming from the eastern Finger Lakes and is coming from the watersheds surrounding them. So this is all trying to give you the picture that this is a very complex system, and the fact that we have this very flat section between Montezuma and Baldwinsville, it makes life very difficult along the Seneca River, and the watersheds for these different places I've shown all have their own rule curves, which I'll get into in a little bit. But they also work in sort of a handshake type thing that they don't want to cause problems downstream, nor do they want problems to be coming in upstream. So it is a partnership of sorts. This may be formalized in the next couple of years with the New York State Canal Corporation probably being the lead agency. Okay, what I did was I chose about a month ago, I chose the water levels, and this was the period that everyone was extremely concerned about. It was basically at the minor damage flood level, and it stayed there. But in the interim, the water level has started to come down. This period here, there was a lot of precipitation, and the water could not leave Seneca Lake fast enough. And so more water kept on coming in and kept on coming in, and they can only release so much water going back out. But with the conditions not drying up, but being less precipitation, water levels have started to fall. A lot of people say the lake level rises quickly, so why can't they lower it as quickly? There's a couple of things. The lake to watershed size ratio contributes how quickly the water levels rise in all the Finger Lakes. In Seneca Lake, the ratio is about 0.65, which means that if the ground is frozen or totally saturated, for every inch that falls on and flows down toward the lake, it adds 0.65 feet to the water level of the lake. To the south, the slopes are steeper. That water gets to the lake much quicker than further to the north, where these slopes are much less. The amount of water that leaves a Finger Lake is dependent upon the size of the natural outlet size of the channel and or what the barge canal has done to adjust for putting in locks like at Waterloo and the double lock at Seneca Falls. But most of the other Finger Lakes don't have this connection. So they have natural channels, but those natural channels aren't these major wide. They have basically the size of, which would be particularly like the average flow of that creek. So in flood levels, those creeks actually flow and flood also. And now the New York State Barge Canal Corporation is developing an Oswego River Basin model for each one of the Finger Lakes, looking at the inflow-outflow conditions, the flow conditions along the canal itself, as well as what is happening upstream and downstream of each of the Finger Lakes to try to model the impacts for all the lakes and the river users. This is an onerous task because there's a lot of things that fit in, which I hope to fill in now. Okay, this is a graphic from lake levels. As probably many of you are aware, this is, again, for Seneca Lake here during that high phase. But we also have these other years representative. This lime color, you can see that in 2025, it didn't get as bad as this year, but those water levels were up and then they came down. And you can look for 2021, where the floods were actually a little bit higher in the fall due to rains that fell during the October-November period. But the lake levels drained very quickly because after that one set of storms, there wasn't much in the way of rain, and so the water levels dropped rather quickly. So, there was also a good question that was in a couple of different newspapers on TV last fall, October the 21, 2025. Why are the water levels so low in the Finger Lakes regions? Well, 2025 had a high, and then there was an extended period of drought. And this is why the water levels were so low in Seneca Lake during this period. And the same is true in the other Finger Lakes too. Okay, for the October, November 2021 high water, I was able to pull from different newspapers the general feeling for each one of the Finger Lakes. Starting at Canandaigua Lake, seen its level rise to 689.9, just shy of the 690 official flood stage. Not excessive flood stage, but the minor flood stage. Other Finger Lakes, including Honey Eye to the west and Owasco to the east, were not as severely affected, seemingly saying that the rain that fell in around Canandaigua Lake and some of the other Finger Lakes was much more than fell around these lakes. They are also smaller watersheds. At Cayuga Lake, heavy rains over the past week caused water levels on several of the Finger Lakes to rise more than a foot in a matter of hours, wrecking docks, freeing boats, and strewing logs and smaller debris. Sounds very familiar, but this is what happened as reported at Cayuga Lake. Seneca Lake, last week's rains, a continuous period of rain, with extraordinary flow from the Cayuga outlet, pushed Seneca Lake's water level from 446.1 to 447.9 a week later. It's expected to remain an inch or two below official flood stage of 448, at least through Thursday evening. It lasted just a little bit longer. Cayuga Lake rose more than a foot and a half in roughly 16 hours due to heavy rains on Tuesday, the 26th. By 7 a.m., the lake level rose to 382.5 above sea level. By evening, it had swelled to 384, easily passing flood stage. And then the morning of the 27th, Cayuga Lake water level was 384.8, just barely below official major flood. This is a combination of the amount of water that fell within the Cayuga Lake watershed, as well as what was coming from Seneca Lake. Now you get over to Skinny Atlas Lake, much further to the east. Due to heavy rains and flooding in the recent days, lake levels have exceeded mean high water, meaning not flood, but mean high water. Water levels will likely be elevated for the next several weeks. Excuse me. Basically, they're saying that they know that they can't release the water quickly because other people are experiencing flooding downstream. Now for the extreme. Cross Lake. As you recall in that earlier figure, it's where the Seneca River enters and exits rather quickly into the lake. And that water basically caused the water level to rise along the Seneca River by roughly 9 feet. The reason for it is it's a river. It's not a Finger Lake. It doesn't have any storage. The only storage is for the water level to go up. And so this is why Cross Lake continually becomes flooded. They complained about the dam down at Baldwinsville. Few people know that the dam is built on a bedrock high. So even if the structure was not there, the water level would still be hung up by the bedrock there. But if the dam wasn't there, you would not have any navigation in that part of the barge canal because the water levels would drop and it would be extremely shallow in the Seneca River. Okay, this is a quote from the Odyssey. Olympus, where they say the god's eternal mansion stands unmoved, never rocked by gale winds, never drenched by rains, nor do the drifting snows assail it. No, the clean air stretches away without a cloud, and a great radiance plays across the world, where the blithe gods live all their days in bliss. Number one, we are not gods. And number two, there's no Olympus in the Oswego River Basin. We are at the mercy of very variable climate, the gale winds and drenching rains and drifting snows mentioned above. While we can enjoy clean air and water if it's managed properly, all our days are not lived in bliss because of the weather. Weather forecasters have what are called a skill level. That skill level is approximately 3 days. If you listen to the weather forecast, they have a pretty good record for maybe 2 to 3 days out. But after that, things can change rather rapidly. So if you listen to a weather forecast, you'll notice that as each day goes on, that forecast may change because the weather has changed. And this is something that the Weather Service really can't forecast beyond 3 days. So what this basically means is Mother Nature rules and not rule curves. So we must keep up with her rule changes, understand them, and act upon reducing these impacts as best one can on each and every property. This is a precipitation map that is basically laid out by COCORAS. It's called the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. These are volunteers who go out every day, winter, spring, summer, and fall. They measure the amount of precipitation, they report it to COCORAS, and then they publish this every day. And if you look at the Weather Bureau pages, you'll see that they use COCORAS data. And sooner or later, once the Canal Corporation develops their initial model, they're going to need data like this. The second reason I show this is in the Cayuga Lake watershed, there are a lot of sites that are found all around the lake. Where if you look at Seneca Lake, there's three, maybe four sites. And then this is the storm that occurred Sunday night. Again, look at all of the data that is available that could be used to develop a forecast of flows getting into the lake and flows leaving the lake. But here, again, we have very limited data. I believe you will get a link to the COCORAS site after this talk is over. If you would like to volunteer, you can do so. And as long as you can commit yourself to basically going out every day. I can say this because I've been doing this for about 5 years. Going out in nice days, if you know it doesn't rain and you look out and you're sure you can just punch a zero and you're done for the day. But in the wintertime, you've got to go out there. You've got to dig your way to your gauge. You've got to measure the thickness of the snowpack. And then you have to maybe once every week or so with the snowpack is actually take a core and basically send that data out. This helps people understand how much water is tied up in the snowpack because once the snowpack starts to melt, this is what causes a lot of the flooding that we see early in the spring. Okay, the ups and downs of Seneca Lake, or how I learned to stop worrying and understand the changes in Seneca Lake and plan to address them as best I can. At this point, questions. I do have another slide, but I'm going to wait till after the questions with hopefully will give a summary of what I've just talked about. So
Yeah,
whoever's
so I
handling the
have
chat.
some questions to start off with. I'll be facilitating them from the chat. So to start off with, the Hansen curve dates to the 70s. We have different weather patterns now, different surface temperatures, different realities, and more extreme weather. Do you think about developing a dynamic Hansen curve approach wherein the control levels and timing are dependent on snowpack, longer range weather forecasts, satellite readings, soil saturations, etc.?
Yeah, basically, I just sort of covered that. Basically, again, the skill level is 3 days for the weather forecast. People have said, well, we can see this big storm coming. The question is, how much water can you release from your lake, be it Seneca, Cayuga, Canandaigua? The channels are small. I know for Cayuga Lake, as I live near it, I don't live on the lake, but I live near it. They can only lower the water level in Cayuga Lake a tenth of a foot a day if they open all the gates at mudlock, but only if the Seneca River is well below the mudlock level. In the 1996 flood, people were complaining in Cayuga Lake, open the gates, let the water out. The water on the other side of the gates downstream was actually higher than Cayuga Lake. If they would open the gates, that water would have actually raised the level in Cayuga Lake. So it's very difficult with the short-term forecasts to basically develop a dynamic type situation. You can look at things like El Nino and La Nina for general trends, but it becomes very, very difficult to forecast what's going on. Let me back up one here. Look at the variability of precipitation from that Sunday storm. Roughly a third of an inch up here, coming up to an inch, a little bit less, less than an inch here, over an inch down here, near an inch here, less than an inch. The precip doesn't fall evenly everywhere, and it makes life very difficult to basically develop. The rule curves are a target that the different lakes try to follow. Yes, they can be adjusted, but they are not a guarantee that it's always they're going to be able to control that water level. If you look at the Seneca Lake Pure Water's website on water levels, toward the bottom, they've got the uh, basically year-end uh, water levels for each lake with the different flood levels. And my son is a big baseball fan. And so I asked him, I said, hey, for a Hall of Fame baseball player, what is the average high batting average for a baseball player? And he said it's around 300 to 325. That means for every 10 times they get up to the plate, 7 times they either strike out, fly out, or don't make it to a base. If you look at those curves that are at the base of the Seneca Lake Pure Water's water level page, it's the exact opposite. There's 10 years where there was no flooding and not much in the way of drought, and there were 3 years that were flooded. So if you look at that way, I know baseball and water levels are completely different. The track record for the rule curves is pretty good, but Mother Nature is in charge. Rainfall is in charge. Snowmelt is in charge. You can forecast it and you can try to lower the water levels, but you only be able to lower the water levels a tenth of a foot. But for a 1 inch rainfall with the ground saturated, it's going to raise it up almost 7 tenths of a foot. So, that tenth of a foot per day isn't that much. And if you get 3 to 4 inches, you're looking at a lot of water. And then you've got to look at what are you going to release downstream? What is going to be your impact downstream? Okay, next question.
This leads in very well to our next question, actually, which is how much downstream flooding buffer can be added, and what kind of an impact can these potential buffers have on lake levels here?
Okay, I need to go back to here. These lakes can release water because there's a lot of fall between here and where it enters the Seneca River system. This lake, Cayuga Lake, can release a lot of water to Seneca, but they try to be a good neighbor. Seneca Lake can release water, but they try to be a good neighbor. And Cayuga Lake, depending upon what's going on in the Seneca River, can release water, but that water then affects this entire system. And this is where, the people at Cross Lake are always complaining because, oh yeah, the water level at Cayuga Lake only went up 2 feet. It went up 9 feet here. It's the difference of what goes on within the barge canal system. So it's not it's a simple thing. Buffers, yes, the rule curves basically say we need to lower the water levels in the early spring so that we have a capacity that to handle some of these spring runoff events. And generally, 7 times out of 10, they do well. 3 times out of 10, they don't do as well. So, it's a balancing act. And because of the physical nature of the system, there is no easy answer to this. You can do computer models, but those computer models are going to be looking at, okay, how much water can they release here and how is it going to affect Cayuga? Well, what's going on in Cayuga and what's going on in the Seneca River? Is there more water coming down here and the water level is actually higher than Cayuga Lake level? This is a complex system. And even with AI, it's not going to answer all the questions. Rule curves can be changed, but again, Mother Nature rules over all of this.
Great. So I'm actually going to combine a couple questions because I think they kind of fit in together. So as you mentioned before, where we release into Cayuga Lake, and that can aggravate their flooding, are there options to create alternate routes so that it bypasses Cayuga Lake and something along the lines of possibly Montezuma Swamp to help attenuate canal water levels? Also, someone mentioned a possible channel or tube to be constructed so Seneca waters could be emptied in an alternate area. Is any of that possible, realistic?
Basically, if you recall, let me back up a little bit further. You've got this trough here. Now, there are people who have recommended that let's improve on the Finger Lakes. Instead of the Finger Lakes all draining to the system, let's have all the Finger Lakes drain to the north, to Lake Ontario. You're looking at a tremendous expense. And in several cases, there are rivers here that you were basically saying, well, we're going to dig through this barrier here that is higher than 500 feet, and we're just going to dump that water on these people down here. Uh, and that's not being a good neighbor. It's not as easy as people would like it to be. Maybe you could order up a glacier and it could redo everything here and create just north draining channels to Lake Ontario. But right now, this is what we're stuck with. Is we're stuck with all of this here. As far as taking uh, the Seneca River and not putting it into Cayuga Lake, oh, the people that live around Cayuga Lake would be jumping up and down because that would be less water coming in. But all you're doing is you're bypassing this and dumping it into this. So, yeah, it could be done. In fact, there is a diversion channel that was constructed by the Montezuma Refuge for low water. During drought periods, the former refuge manager, who I knew and I worked with, said that we've got this problem and we built a pumping station, but the pumping station became unstable and we couldn't use it. I said, did you ever consider basically developing a canal from Cayuga Lake into the refuge because Cayuga Lake is higher than the inside of the refuge? And they went ahead and did that. If you would recommend doing Seneca Lake going into the barge canal, you've got all the infrastructure that you've got to go through under 5 and 20, the power towers that are there, the major gas lines that run along Route 5 and 20. You've got to run it through the refuge. You can't run it into the refuge because then you're going to flood and actually have the water flow over their dikes. There has been talk about Further downstream, there are basically black earth areas where there used to be wetlands and they're raising all types of root crops now. Some of those black earth areas have lost all of their black earth, and they're talking about basically turning those into flood retention reservoirs. But those areas have a discrete size, and you can fill them up extremely quickly and then still have excess of water that wants to move downstream. There are some opportunities that do exist, but they need to be considered. And depending upon the volume of flow, if you have 4,000 gallons a minute leaving Cayuga Lake and you open up a couple of those former black earth areas, they're going to be filled up within an hour. And then you're still going to have 8,000 CFS wanting to move down the Seneca River. There are possibilities, they're expensive, and how well they work. And then you have to consider the ecology of the area too. Flooding is a big concern, totally understand it. But you have to think about all the other impacts that goes on with that. So again, there's no easy answer.
Uh, well, looking at that, it's such a complicated system with so much that goes into it, and it also is a complicated system as to who's actually overseeing it and who determines what for what lake. What organizations are responsible for flood control in Seneca Lake, and what are the canal corporation's responsibilities with respect to flood control? Are they just responsible for power generation, or are they also responsible for flood control?
Okay. The only two lakes that the Canal Corporation oversees is Seneca and Cayuga because it's part of the barge canal system. There is a canal system that goes from Seneca Lake through Waterloo, through Seneca Falls to Cayuga Lake. And Cayuga Lake has a structure, mudlock, that controls water levels there. Their rule curves basically say we're going to lower the water level in these lakes early in the spring if they know how much water is tied up in the snowpack. If they can predict what type of storm is going to happen. I recall it's either 96 or 93. I can remember that my wife and my daughter were up by the garage in their bathing suits because it was 71 degrees. Snow was melting, the snowpack was melting, the lake level was rising, but my daughter and wife were enjoying getting sun. That night, it rained 3 inches of rain, and then the temperature dropped to below zero. That was never forecast. The rain was forecast because they could see it coming. The amount of rain was in question. And then that drop in temperature really caused all types of problems. So again, the timing, we have a short window to basically adjust to. Again, that forecast window is only like 3 days long. You can possibly push it out a little bit further, but there have been years when they've lowered the lake level in anticipation, and Mother Nature has very, very slowly had the snowpack melt, and then all of a sudden the water level's too low. And then it decides not to rain, and then people are complaining that the water level's too low. Again, these lakes are not easy to control because they are all interlinked.
Gotcha. Looking more at the system, is the infrastructure that controls the system itself, is that antiquated? And what would you like to see in terms of infrastructure to ensure that A, things like that what happened recently to Seneca Lake don't happen, but B, that there's it's better for everyone involved?
Uh, Infrastructure wise, yes, there are hydropower projects in Waterloo and Seneca Falls. There are also locks, and there are overflows for those locks. You don't want to start saying, okay, I'm going to open up one of the locks because once you open those locks, and if you got tons and tons of water upstream, you'll never get them closed again. And then that means Seneca Lake's going to drain into Cayuga Lake, and that's going to raise the water level of Cayuga Lake. You don't want mudlock to be overtopped. And there's only so much water they can release from the mudlock structures. And it depends upon what the water level is on the downstream side of mudlock. Now, the people that live along the Seneca River downstream of mudlock have said, well, that darn structure at Baldwinsville, they can lower that structure. Yes, they can do that, and they can release more water. But then you have all the people from downstream of Baldwinsville, including Onondaga Lake, including all the people that live along the uh, uh, the Seneca River down to where Oneida River comes in, which raises all those water levels. And then the water levels in the what becomes the Oswego River is basically locked. There were waterfalls in Fulton. There were waterfalls all the way down the Oswego River, and that's why the locks are there, so they can lock down to get the boats down into Lake Ontario. If you remove those locks and go to a natural system, yeah, it'll drain it, but without those locks, there's no summer ability to basically move up the Oswego River because there's waterfalls, and the same in the Seneca River going to Seneca Lake. You remove those locks, you've got waterfalls. You can go back to what they did before and you put the locks on the outside of the river, but there's a tremendous expense in that. But again, the locks serve a purpose for navigation. The locks and the lakes serve a diminished amount of ability to control water levels and store water. But depending upon what Mother Nature says as far as rainfall and runoff, you can either hedge to the high side or hedge to the low side. And either way, Mother Nature will always throw that curveball in there. And again, looking at the records that are on the Seneca Lake webpage, 7 times out of 10 times, they did a good job. Those 3 times are what people are complaining about now. You can't please all the people all the time, and you can't change the hydrology of the system because each lake operates differently. Most of the other Finger Lakes, as you can see in that one diagram on this diagram, they can release water and say, it's your problem downstream, but they don't. They all try to work together. There are lake associations, and as I said, there are handshake agreements that if they know that from basically Owasco and Skinny Atlas Lake, if they know there's downstream flooding on the Seneca River, they're going to try to hold water back. Recall that one newspaper article for Seneca. They said the water level in Skinny Atlas Lake is going to stay high because there's a problem downstream. Otisco Lake flows directly into Onondaga Lake. So Onondaga Lake is affected by Otisco Lake, but not by much. It's a smaller watershed. But it is also controlled by the waters that come out of Cross Lake and over and through the Baldwinsville Lock. And then you've got the water coming in from the east from Oneida Lake, which causes problems in this same section also. So again, you've got all these different inputs, and everyone's trying not to flood their neighbor. But they also have people that live around these lakes that say, hey, my water's too high. And yes, we're trying to get that down. What happened at Seneca was sort of a bullseye for continuous type of rainfalls where the other lakes were not seeing as much. And so, unfortunately, Seneca got the brunt of it this time. But there's been other years where Seneca has not gotten it as bad, but Cayuga's gotten it bad. Cayuga has gotten it bad, and they hold back water because they know Seneca is high. So again, it's cooperation. I think in the long run, the Canal Corporation is going to get handed this ball of wax. Not only are they responsible for Seneca and Cayuga Lake because it's part of the barge canal system, these other lakes if they develop an Oswego River Basin model, it's going to be all of these lakes working together, but they're not going to ameliorate all the flooding nor all the low water because, again, Mother Nature rules and weather forecasting can take things out so far. I hate to be a negative Nelly on all this, but this is what I've learned over the years is that this is a highly complex system. As I said, it's the size of the state of Connecticut, and it's all linked together through the barge canal system. And yes, take the barge canal system out, it would be different. You'd still have high water some years, but then once that high water is gone, there's very little water, and those rivers are not navigable. I remember
Doesn't, oh, sorry.
basically from Cayuga Lake, there was information that basically said that people coming from the west, when they got to the Seneca River, before they built the Richmond Aqueduct, basically they couldn't get across the Seneca River because it was too shallow. They had to unload material from the barges, haul it across to the other side, get the barge across, reload it, and then via locks get it back up and into the canal to go further to the east. And the same true is going west. That's why they built the Richmond Aqueduct to get it out of the Seneca River. And then later on, they destroyed the Richmond Aqueduct when they put the barge canal into the larger rivers. So there have been these different ways of doing things, and it is a very, very complex situation. But again, the hydrogeology of this area. Oh, real quick. The original intent was to take water from the Niagara River at that elevation, and they projected a declining line all the way across the state to Albany and said, look, we can just build this canal right across. Then they sent out the surveyors and they said, guys, there's this dip in the elevation, which is basically at Cayuga Lake. And they would have had to have built an aqueduct over 70 feet high to basically bypass that dip, which is Cayuga Lake as part of the Seneca River. Again, uh, people think things are simple. When you get on the ground, you find there are a lot of problems that need to be adjusted to. That's what they've done they've rebuilt the barge canal 3 times. And they're talking about changing some things, yes, but it's not going to change the overall situation of the Finger Lakes.
Got you. In the diagram that we're looking at right now, I'm trying to look at the numbers. The lakes are deeper than what's shown here, or is
Oh,
it
yeah, yeah. Like I said, this is a cartoon. If I would show all of these lakes, they would be off the bottom of the page. Because again, this is 25 feet and this is 10 miles. So to get this to work together, we'd have a diagram that basically was a thick black line right through the middle of the page. So again, this is only 25 feet. I could not take all these Finger Lakes and draw them as deep as they truly are.
okay? But today we met with Canal Corp reps who said that Relevate also has a big role to play in the outflow. How would you suggest we improve the way things are now instead of, because we're never going to control everything perfectly, like a perfect system doesn't exist, but are there improvements that can be made to make things better for us?
If there are, if you're talking about Seneca Lake,
Yes.
but then you've got to think about downstream. You got to think about Cayuga Lake. You've got to think about that 30-mile stretch from Cayuga Lake to Baldwinsville, and then you got to think about the stretch that goes from downstream of Baldwinsville, past Onondaga Lake, and over to Oneida Lake. It's all part of an integrated system, and as you can see, the water level or the canal level change is less than 50 feet through this entire section. And the
Got
water's
you.
not gonna flow quickly because it's pretty much close to a flat plain.
So, what infrastructure would you recommend investing in to help alleviate flooding for Seneca Lake,
Oh,
potentially?
again, you can do all types of infrastructure to get the water levels down. But what's going to happen downstream? If you're going to basically, okay, we're going the heck with everybody else. We're going to put in canals with dams and things like that that we can let the water out. Then you're basically saying the heck with everybody that lives downstream. Not only Cuba Lake, but the people along the Seneca River, all the way past Onondaga Lake, until you get into the Three Rivers Junction area, and the water levels start to fall there. But because there used to be waterfalls there, they're all locks there. Do you blow up all the locks and get the water out? Then what do you do in the summertime when nobody can basically use the river system at all? To be very blunt, no, I cannot think of anything to reduce the amount of water level in the lake efficiently without hurting somebody else.
Do you think adjusting the rule curve could play a role in that potentially?
Again, move back to the rule curve. This is where we need to be. Yes, you can take into things like, okay, we know it's going to be an El Nino year. That means more precip. So let's shift things a little bit. Though let's lower the water levels a little bit. And then what happens if Mother Nature decides, well, we're not going to rain around the Finger Lakes for a couple of months? Then your water levels are too low. And then you are required to discharge water out of these lakes to maintain the ecology of the streams. And so, again, you've got to fall back on this is the weather. We can only do so much with the weather. We can look at the rule curves and try to adjust to them as best as possible. And again, 7 out of 10 years, the rule curves work really well. Those 3 years or so that don't work well, okay, what can we do to improve? It's tough because, again, it depends upon the amount of precipitation you get. And as you could see from the diagrams I showed from Kokoros, it's not a consistent half inch from the top of the lake to the bottom of the lake. And again, water comes in more quickly at the steeper slopes at the southern end of the lakes, and it comes in more slowly at the shallow north ends of the lakes because there's less slope. Um, and as I said right from the beginning, I don't have all the answers. And this
Hmm.
one, there is no easy answer. The only thing I can say is you live in a floodplain if you live right on the lake. And there may be some things that you can do to basically bolster your docks, maybe move to floating docks, or maybe docks that you can pull out of the water and then you can put them back in. I don't know. I know that's expensive and it's difficult to do. Maintaining your shorelines, it's extremely difficult to do. You can put tons and tons of riprap there to try to protect the shoreline so you don't get as much erosion. But things do occur. And if you do that and then your neighbor doesn't, then the water comes around and comes in behind the riprap that you put on your property. I don't recommend a wall all the way around the lake. People enjoy looking at the lake. They enjoy going down to the lake, down to their dock, to their boats, and so on and so forth. But tongue in cheek, there is no Olympus within the watershed. We are not gods. And we have to adjust to the fact that we are going to see flooding every so often, and we're going to see low water every so often. The best thing we can do is try to understand what's going on and try as best as possible to work with your neighbors to try to stabilize things. Um, I talked to a person, oh, in fact, it was Seneca Lake at that talk. There was a person who lived at the north end of the lake, and he said that every time the lake flooded, water would come down this channel and it would dump tons and tons of sediment onto his property. He had to bring in a contractor to dig it all up and remove it. Cost a lot of money. And he came up to me afterward and said, "What do you think?" I said, "Why don't you keep that material there? Build yourself a wall and allow the water to basically rise high enough that it doesn't come onto your property but flows into the lake." And he said, okay, never heard anything about that. There was another person who approached me on Cayuga Lake. We just bought some property on Cayuga Lake. Come down. We need your advice. I said, okay, it's free advice. Lady took me down to her property. It is physically part of a stream channel. The water came down a steep hill. It came down toward where they wanted to build their house, but then it took a turn to the one hillside and the water flowed out. And I said that this is great, but if you get a flood, that water is not going to take that left-hand turn. And I said, to be honest with you, have you seen houses along the coast where they build them on piers? Oh, that's so ugly. I said, you wanted my advice? Build your house on piers. Okay, well, I'll tell my husband. 2, 3 years later, they had a major flood. Walking down the street, this lady comes up to me and gives me this big hug. And she said, oh, thank you, thank you. And I said, about what? And she said, oh, how was the person that I took down and you said to build it on stilts? We did that. And when the flood occurred, we had plywood that was ripped out, was thrown into the lakes. The kids' bikes were there. They were thrown into the lake. The canoe they had was in the lake, but our house stood. I'm not recommending that people do this uh, around Seneca Lake, but here was a person that, looked at the situation and said, there are going to be floods. And what can we do to reduce the impact of my house on the lake? Uh, if you go back to the early 1900s, there were shacks because people knew that they were going to be flooded out. So if the shack, gets washed out or gets flooded, we'll just come in and we'll rebuild and everything else. Now we have people who are building very, very, very nice houses right at the lake in the floodplain, and then they complain about being flooded. If you live in a
Gotcha.
floodplain, you can expect to be flooded. There are things that you can do. For people who have houses, I've had people say, well, I live on Cayuga Lake and I took your advice and my house is 2 feet below the major water level. What should I do? I looked at him and said, to be honest, raise your house up 3 feet. That's all you can do. You can't stop the lake from flooding every so often, or else you let it flood and then you have to deal with the damage from your flood. Again, it's not simple, it's not cheap, but if you enjoy the lake, and I know people just definitely enjoy the lake, and I know people enjoy the rivers, the Susquehanna River, when it gets flooded, people get flooded out and they come back in and they rebuild. In certain cases, now you're seeing places where they're saying, you live in a floodplain, you're going to have to do something. Katrina, when it hit Long Island, I had relatives that lived on Long Island, and luckily they
Sandy.
just got barely flooded. But there were other people who lived in Long Beach, and they were told, if you're going to rebuild, you have to raise your house by 5 feet because the water level from Katrina was like 4 feet. And there were people who did, and there were people who said, nope, and walked away and sold their property. It's difficult. We can't.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly difficult, but here at Seneca Lake, and pretty much we have room for maybe one more question. There is some concern. You've talked about Cross Lake a bunch and how everyone should be good neighbors. Does Cross Lake have more control over what's going on upstream over more populous lakes? I mean, is Cross Lake designated a floodplain? Is
Okay, when you look at Cross Lake, you're looking at the Seneca River. Forget the lake. It's a wide spot in the river. And so what you're talking about is, can we control the water level in the Seneca River? And this is where people who live along the Seneca River and Cross Lake have said, well, then lower the darn dam at Baldwinsville so we don't get flooded. It doesn't work that way because if you lower the water level, it causes problems for navigation in the summer. But when you get a flood, you get more water moving downstream, flooding people further downstream. That's why it's important to understand everyone lives in the watershed, be it Seneca Lake, Cayuga Lake, Canandaigua Lake, Owasco Lake, whatever. But there are people that live upstream of you, and there are people that live downstream of you. We all should try to be good neighbors and try not to flood each other out. And to say that we should be able to drain, Seneca Lake easily, then you're passing the problem further downstream.
So what you would be recommending more is more of a holistic approach where all the lakes in the system are actually taking each other into account when they make decisions.
Very, very true. That is the best way to do this. It's not always going to work, but it's again working together to try to ameliorate the problem. You can't do it any other way because you're limited by what Mother Nature left us as far as that trough, that 500-foot trough that goes basically, from, well, let's back up here. So basically, you're looking at this 500-foot trough from the west, from basically Mendon, not Mendon, Macedon, all the way over, and including Oneida Lake, all the way to where the summit level is near Rome. This is the problem that causes all the problems for all the Finger Lakes, is that this one section basically controls the water levels of everything upstream. Then you have the Oswego River, which is all locked because it was all waterfalls going all the way down. So again, it's outside that 500-foot contour, but the difference is you've got this, but it's all locked all the way down.
Gotcha.
But this
All right.
this is the problem right here. This flat section from here to here, you're looking at 25 feet of fall over 10 to over 100 feet, over 100 miles. You definitely can't drain that system. Even naturally, you can't drain that system. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. I want to say thank you so much
I do
for
I do have my closing slide that I'll move to if that's okay.
yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, takeaways. Hopefully you have at least take away some of these. We all live in a watershed, one that extends up and downstream from where we live. Two, weather forecasting is improving, but the skill level still remains at 3 days. Weather forecasts will always change the further away you get from today's forecast, which causes all types of problems with flooding in all the lakes. We've seen greater variability in our weather over the past several decades, which has caused more numerous highs and lows of lake levels, corresponding to heavier than normal precipitation runoff or extended periods of drought. Prior to this time, there were floods and droughts, but not to the extremes and numbers we see today. I've looked at records through dendrochronology and basically looking back earlier than the 1880s, the climate was much more variable. From the 1880s to about the 1960s, the climate was much more moderated. Now we're back into what we saw in the 1880s. We are seeing greater variability. We are seeing floods higher. We are seeing droughts lower. We're seeing temperatures colder. We're seeing temperatures hotter. So that period from 1880 to about 1960, all of our infrastructure was built based upon that period of time when it should have been built either prior to or now. As people have suggested, we need to reconsider what Mother Nature is now dealing to us and try to improve upon that. Seneca Lake watershed is large, but the outlet only allows so much water to be released downstream. While the lake level can rise quickly due to excessive precipitation, the rate of fall is much slower due to the limited natural capacity of the lake's outlet and the hydropower projects and locks at Waterloo and at Seneca Falls, which were originally waterfalls. Once Seneca and Cuga Lake outflows reach the Seneca River below Mudwalk, the river canal has a limited gradient. It's basically flat. Water flows slowly east of Baldwinsville, about 30 miles downstream. The rule curve for any lake is a target or a goal that is affected by all of the above, but it is not a guarantee. And again, 7 out of 10 times, the rule curves have worked. It's the three that are causing the problem. Well, easy to cast blame is more important to understand, plan for, and address water level change so that we can all enjoy the beauty of all the lakes, streams, and rivers within the Oswego River Basin. Um, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Bill. We really, really appreciate you having you on tonight. And we'll make sure that we'll get this on our YouTube and our social media pages. I also want to thank everyone who attended tonight. Thank you so much. This is the beginning of what we hope is a deep dive series in a number of different issues on Seneca Lake, a webinar series. We will actually have one next week on the 24th, where our own Mark Petzold will run through the 9E plan and talk about why it's important and why it matters and what the future holds for it. So we'll be going into detail on that. Again, I want to say thank you so much to everyone who attended. And if you have any questions, you can always follow up with me, and I'll try and get them over to Bill afterwards. And yeah, that's about it. So again, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.